Elise Stefanik went to Harvard, so she's passionate about that on a number of levels. Joining me now, New York Post columnist Rikki Schlott, who has an exclusive report on the cost of the backlash for Ivy League schools. Rikki, great to have you with us. It has been quite interesting to see what has happened since October 7th, as donors who might have looked askance at some of the things that were going on these campuses are now pulling wholesale out of supporting them in some cases. What are you seeing?
Absolutely, and these schools are going to have to find out how they're going to fill the gap from these major donors who are pulling pledges for years on end, which might mean that smaller dollar donors now, in the past couple of years, you'd have to donate $20 million to actually make a difference in getting into Harvard. Now that might be closer to $2 million, according to some sources that I spoke to. But I think the true irony here is these schools are suddenly professing this allegiance to free speech. But the reason that things are so dire on their campuses is because they've dismally failed. Make no mistake, it's no coincidence that these most elite schools with the lowest free speech rankings, according to national data, are the schools where anti-Semitism is thriving. Because when discourse cannot happen out in the open and when competing views can't meet in civil dialogue and discourse, they go underground, they fester, they become more extreme, and then in moments of conflict like this, they rear their head, and all of a sudden you have Harvard students for Hamas.
I mean, it's so stunning to watch this. It almost feels like you're in an upside-down world. I mean, you watch the protection of trans rights, which, you can make an argument for that. You watch the protection of certain kinds of food that might be cultural appropriation, that had upset people in dining halls. And then you have these calls for intifada against Jewish people, and you hear these accounts from these students who say, I don't feel safe, and I don't see anybody carving out safe spaces for them. Here's another exchange between Elise Stefanik, Congresswoman, and the president of Harvard, Dr. Gay. Watch this.
Dr. Gay, a Harvard student calling for the mass murder of African Americans is not protected free speech at Harvard, correct?
Our commitment to free speech...
It's a yes or no question. Is that corrected? Is that okay for students to call for the mass murder of African Americans at Harvard? Is that protected free speech?
Our commitment to free speech...
It's a yes or no question.
She's arguing that they have a solid commitment to free speech, but you hear the irony in what Elise Stefanik is trying to point out there in her question. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, according to the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, Harvard is dead last in free speech rankings. This is not historically true. This sudden realization that free expression and viewpoint neutrality as an institution is something to uphold is really disheartening given the timing, because when I was a student at NYU, we'd regularly get emails about the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, about Black Lives Matter, about the election of presidents, and all of a sudden in October, Harvard and Dr. Gay, who was just testifying, were very obviously and suddenly silent on something that should not have been nearly as hard as those other issues to condemn, when it's the rape and murder and torture of innocent civilians.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at this situation, this is Barry Weiss basically telling people, in her opinion, that families who raise their children with this goal of going to Ivy League universities should really start looking at the whole thing very differently. Watch this.
Friends and enemies are not who they were, or not who they thought they were before October 7th. Accepting this might be hard for some of you, as it has been for me. It might mean giving up on nice things, giving up on Harvard. Harvard and Yale don't give us value. We give us value.
Thought on that?
Yeah, I'm a proud dropout, not because I flunked out, but because I believe that we should stop forking over our dollars and our time and also our institutional faith into these institutions that consistently fail us and have demonstrated that they produce hosts of students that are steeped in radicalism and not critical thinking. And I don't think that we should continue to entrust schools like Harvard to educate our future leaders without really scrutinizing them.
Yeah, well, you're living proof that it's not necessary. She's got a bi-weekly column at the New York Post, and you're just making a great splash in terms of the thought process and thinking. I watched your interview and discussion that you did with Jordan Peterson and your co-author on your book the other day. Really well done, Rikki. Always good to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rikki Schlott, joining us this afternoon. So as I mentioned earlier,